Welcome back, pod people. In today's episode, my guest is Professor Dustin Morrow, the writer-director of the 2019 film Black Pool. And normally when I introduce a movie like this, I say the genre that it's in, like the 2019 horror film or sci-fi film or what have you. But Black Pool is categorized on IMDb as a thriller, but when I was watching it, I really got the sensation that it was almost like an anti-thriller, in that most thriller movies introduce us to the characters and then have like a lot of interesting action and chasing and fun explosions and things like that. Whereas Black Pool, we start in media res with the one of the main characters already having kidnapped the other main character, and we see a little bit of the sort of explosions and that sort of thing that you would expect in a thriller film, but only in the form of flashbacks and archival footage of actual bombings. And so we don't get the fun, thrilling aspect that you would expect in a thriller film. And instead, this is really more of a tragedy that only shows us the aftermath of all of those actions. So, Professor Morrow, or should I call you Professor Morrow or Dustin? Or
you can call me Dustin.
Okay. So, Dustin, tell us a bit about the decision-making process that led to creating this really interesting structure for the film.
The film came about from a couple of different things. One of them sort of thematic, content-based, and the other one more pragmatic. The former was that I was interested for a long time in making a film about the politics of Northern Ireland. I have worked in Ireland a lot and done a lot of projects that have addressed various aspects of contemporary Irish identity. I've done some short films about the politics of Ireland, but never a narrative feature. And that was something I was interested in trying, and it kind of came to a head after Brexit passed in the UK, because that reheated discussions about the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, which had for decades at this point been very peaceful, because both countries were part of the European Union, so it was an open border. When Brexit passed, there was a lot of concern in Ireland and Northern Ireland about whether that might remilitarize that border, and sort of reignite some of the violence that surrounds the conflict that has raged forever in Northern Ireland. So it was an interesting time to try to address those themes and that history. The pragmatic approach was just that I've become very interested in working with actors. I mean, I've always been interested in working with actors, but I wrote a book a few years ago with Kathleen Turner, the legendary actress from Romancing the Stone and Prizzi's Honor and Body Heat and Serial Mom and Virgin Suicides. And that process of writing that book with her was very eye-opening to me, because I sort of thought, as somebody who's been directing movies for a long time, that I had a handle on the actors process and how to work with actors, how to experiment with actors, and realizing as I worked with her in depth on a 400-page book that I didn't really know what I thought I knew. And so I decided I really wanted to make a film where the faces of the actors became the principal visual landscape of the movie, and work with just a very small cast in a very confined setting, where the concentration of my work could be collaborating with them to craft those performances.
Yeah,
And
I think
so. So there's only 3 actors in the movie, and the script was written very carefully to make the audience constantly question their allegiance with various characters,
which
constantly
it
make
succeeded with,
yeah,
I think, from my point of view.
yeah, try to make you sort of think, you know, at various points in the movie, who is the good guy, who is the bad guy. Keep it all shades of gray, which is why the movie's in black and white. Um,
Up until the end, when forgiveness enters into the picture, and then it becomes color again.
yeah, and they're able to get out of that basement.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it was sort of those two things that led to deciding to do that movie at that particular point.
that makes sense. Interesting. Yeah. Speaking of the aspects of black and white versus color,
Mhm.
could you talk a little bit about that? Was something I assumed, when it opened and it's in black and white. Oh, okay, this is a black and white movie. It's going to be black and white the whole way through. But then it's not. The very last scene is in color. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, what's funny is that the very first shot is actually in color, and the color drains out of the shot, and then the movie's in black and white for about 80 minutes until, as you noted, like the last 5 or 10 minutes are in color. What's great is that I heard from all these projectionists that were showing the movie in theaters around the country were like, is there something wrong with this? Because we started it and it's in color, and then all of a sudden the color kind of bleeds out of the image, and I think we've got a bad copy. And I was like, no, that's the way it's supposed to look. So I should have sent a note with everybody who had to screen it so that they were prepared for it. But I became the the irritation of projectionists all over the place.
Reminds me a bit of, I think it's Gremlins 2, where the projector film breaks down. I've heard that there were projectionists who freaked out when viewing that part for the first time.
Yeah, you have to be careful with stuff like that. There's a whole sequence in Kill Bill Part 2 where the bride, I think she blinks and then it goes black and white for 10 minutes. And I heard Tarantino say later that he had to do that because there was so much blood in the sequence that it was going to result in an NC-17 if he didn't go to black and white. But I remember seeing that in the theater, having not heard about that, and wondering whether there was something wrong with the projection that I was getting, and because it just felt very random that 2 hours into a 2.5 hour movie, all of a sudden we were just gonna be in black and white for a while. Anyway,
and here I was just assuming it was an aesthetic decision.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I mean, well, yeah. In the case of Blackpool, it totally is. It's not. It was a decision made for a number of reasons. One of which is that sort of genre-wise, there's an element of film noir about this story, and also the faces of the actors just looked more interesting in black and white. And it's not like it's a particularly visually compelling. It's not a scenario that provides a lot of opportunity to do visual fireworks. A bunch of people trapped in a dank basement. One interesting thing we did do, though, and this was kind of the DP kind of talked me into this. We had a whole, you can almost not see it in the film, but there's a whole set there. We shot on a soundstage and we built a whole fake basement set.
Oh, really?
And,
I'd assume you filmed in an actual basement.
No, it was done in the studio, and we lit it, and he's like, I think we should just pull. He kept pulling more and more lights out, and it just kept getting darker and darker and darker, and to the point where now, if you watch the movie, you really can't even see any of the set. It really is just literally the actors, and it's interesting because the decision to do that ultimately took the movie out of, I think, almost a realistic setting and almost made it, I don't know, the word metaphorical sounds really pretentious, but it sort of made it otherworldly almost, in a way.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's just like these three people are the only people in the world at the time this is happening.
I also found the use of black and white, at least from my perspective, functioned as sort of a metaphor for the characters' moods. That Michael Foley, the one doing the torture, has this extremely black and white viewpoint, which then gets, when the color gets introduced, that seemed like a metaphor for him accepting that there's nuance to all of this.
Yep. Yeah, that's
And
cool that you picked up on that. That's exactly it. There's even a line in a dialogue in the movie when he's listening to the podcast interview with the guy um, who killed his father, and the guy is explaining the conflict in Northern Ireland. It's a little bit of clunky exposition, but he says, it's not a conflict of black and white. It's all shades of gray, and it is a very complicated conflict. People who don't know a ton about it tend to think it's about Catholics versus Protestants, that it's like a religious conflict, but it's really not. It's really like a political conflict and an economic conflict. It's a cultural conflict, and there's a lot more to it than just Protestants versus Catholics.
yeah, it's interesting that you use the phrase shades of gray, because uh, um, I often find myself sort of annoyed by that phrase, because I think that it implies, like, at least, for my very mathematical background, it makes me think like, okay, well, that means that, it's not 100% right, 0% wrong, it's 70% right, 30% wrong, or something like that. Whereas in reality, it's even more complicated than that. I think that I found it really interesting that the poster for this film is the Irish flag in the background, with the black hammer in front of it, and the Irish flag is pure color. There's no symbology in it the way that there is in, like, there aren't stars or a coat of arms or anything. And so I went in expecting there to be something interesting going on with color, and then the fact that it was almost entirely in black and white was the interesting thing that was going on with color. So I found all of that really interesting. I really like it when filmmakers make use of the visual language of film, and especially when, like, all of the people that I interview on this podcast are independent filmmakers who work with rather small budgets. And I always find it interesting when those restrictions breed creativity, and people, like you said, I think you had, what, 3 actors and 3 sets, and the 3 colors of the Irish flag, I'm just noticing. And all
all intentional.
all of these things that all of these restrictions that have forced you to think and film in creative ways.
Yeah, and it's great when you're working in micro budget filmmaking, unless you're intentionally setting out to make like a little horror movie that you're hoping to make a few bucks on, which really, even horror, as lucrative as it is, anyone who goes into micro budget filmmaking thinking they're going to make money is in the wrong industry. The great thing about it is that it allows you to make kind of non-commercial decisions. That was shooting a movie in black and white is not a good idea if you want to get a wide release for it, get a bunch of people to see it. People don't want to watch black and white movies. They don't want to watch movies with subtitles. There's things that
I do.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's things that you and I as cineasts like relish, but that the average person has an aversion to. So, but you could do it when you're making little movies like this, and you're trying to hopefully please yourself before anybody else.
Yeah. So on the subject of the technical aspects of producing the film, I'm curious, what was the budget for Blackpool?
It was like about 12 grand, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so definitely,
really
definitely within the micro budget range. And what camera did you film it on?
What did we shoot on? We shot on a C300.
Okay. And it was just the one camera, I assume?
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah. We had a couple, but we didn't end up doing any 2-camera shoots on this.
Cool. I had one more question I wanted to ask about the production of it, but it's slipping my mind at the moment. You mentioned working with Kathleen Turner earlier,
Mhm,
who, among other things, was in Serial Mom, the
mhm,
John Waters film. Um, and I'm thinking about how micro-budget independent filmmaking has changed over the decades, where John Waters, in his early work like Pink Flamingos, I believe literally had to steal the film from a production company in order to film it on that, literal film stock.
mhm,
Whereas nowadays, if I recall correctly, the Canon C300, that's a digital camera that,
mhm.
so you no need for film anymore.
Yep.
And so I'm curious, what have you observed in terms of how filmmaking, and especially micro budget filmmaking, has changed over time, and where do you think it's going in the future?
Well, certainly digital cameras have democratized filmmaking and made it possible for people who um, used to be unable to overcome the barriers to making a feature film. It's allowed them to do that. I have students that make features while they're still in college. I tell them not to do that, but they do it anyway.
Why do you tell them not to do that?
Because I think that it's a good idea to experiment in the short form first, even
Hmm.
though, because when you're a student, I tell them this all the time, that when you're a student, it's not really about, you're not trying to make a movie that's going to take the world by storm. You're learning a set of skills. You're learning how to tell stories with images and sound. And so while you're doing that, you should want to make as many films as possible, because frankly, most of the first films you make are going to be pretty bad, because you're, but they have great value to you as an artist because you're learning your craft. You're making mistakes and you're learning from those mistakes. And so students that come in and they haven't made any shorts and they're like, well, I'm going to make a feature. It's almost like saying, I've never swum in a pool before in my life, but I'm going to go jump into the middle of the ocean. You just need to, there's a certain skill set that you need to develop before you bite off more than you can chew. And I haven't yet. I'm sure someday someone will make one that'll blow me away, but I haven't yet seen that. um I can't remember how I got on that. Oh, micro budget filmmaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great because it, as I said, it allows you to take risks. Um and just like you were saying, I find often that limitation often provokes creativity. I mean, many of the best movies in all genres are, you know, I saw an interview with Sam Raimi recently where he was talking about having about $6 to make Evil Dead, and he was just talking about, how he and Bruce Campbell would build these rigs. They would like nail a camera to a 2x4, and they would each get on a side of the 2x4, and then they would just sprint through the woods. And that's how they got that like crazy shot that we all know of the ghoul kind of launching through the
Yeah.
forest. And that kind of required solution finding often results in us seeing stuff that we've never seen before. Um, there's nothing more boring than a, you know a $200 million. I watched the last Jurassic Park sequel last night,
Yeah.
and I mean, I guess I shouldn't say
I'd be
this.
surprised if its budget is only 200 million.
Yeah, and it was just terrible. It was like this big, shapeless, formless, passionless, boring, um, thing. It just lied there like a dead fish. It was just, or a dead
Mm.
dinosaur, as it were. Um, and it was just like, and it just reeked of what so many of those movies are, which is like, throwing money at problems, which I find rarely results in creative inspiration. But
Yeah.
having said that, the movie I'm working on now has a pretty big budget by my standards, and so we'll see. Maybe I'll
What's
change. Maybe I'll change my tune. Come back and talk to me in 6 months.
what's the movie you're working on now? Tell us about that.
It's a it's a thriller that I wrote that is going to be directed by Fred Decker, who is a friend of mine and also one of my favorite filmmakers. He did The Monster Squad, Night of the Creeps. He wrote The Predator.
I know those movies.
Yeah. Yeah, he's great. He hasn't directed in quite a long time, so he's excited to kind of get back behind a camera, and he's kind of bursting with creative energy, which is cool to see. And it's Hollywood, so projects could always fall apart, but this one seems like it's going to go, so hopefully it will, and we'll make something cool.
Cool. I would love to interview him about all of that. You mentioned wanting people to work on short films while they're in college and then wait until after they've graduated to make feature films. And you also mentioned the work of Sam Raimi, which I find really amusing because he shot Within the Woods, which is a half-hour long short film while he was in college, which was basically almost like a pilot for The Evil Dead, and then dropped out of college and shot The Evil Dead. Which makes me, which is it's really interesting to me how that sort of lines up with what you were saying, except for the whole waiting to graduate college part, and makes me wonder to what degree simply having more time makes a difference in terms of the scale of film that you're able to make.
Yeah, well, I've known people that have spent far more on their 5-minute long films than I've spent on Blackpool. You
mean in terms of time?
In terms of time and money.
Oh, wow.
So, the duration of your movie, the scale that you assign your screenplay can vary. I mean, I've seen people spend a year working on a short film, and I've seen people crank out a feature in a couple weeks. So
what was the shooting time on Blackpool?
Blackpool was shot in, I want to say 5 days, 4 days, 5 days. It was very, very fast. I had a short window with a couple of the actors.
So definitely had everything like tightly scheduled and
we weren't
prepared.
Yeah, they weren't like improvising a ton or anything like that. And I had storyboarded the whole movie and knew exactly what it was going to look like. And I tend to work fast anyway. I just run a fast set. I just like that. It keeps everybody. There's so much sitting around when you're making a movie that the less you can have people sitting around, and sort of the more energy and enthusiasm they bring to the project. I think if you could keep people fully engaged at all times, which not always possible, but
yeah. Yeah, so thinking about the act of directing your actors and creating characters, I find that something I've been thinking about a lot recently as regards, especially like genre films and double especially horror films, is that it's really important that the audience have strong opinions about the characters. And traditionally in most genres, this means that you want the audience to like the characters. But in horror particularly, it also works if the audience hates the characters. And so I found my opinions of the characters, especially Aidan Flynn, evolving over the course of the film, whereas usually in a film, you start out not knowing anything about the character, they get established pretty quickly, and then you usually maintain basically the same opinion of them throughout the whole movie. Whereas in this, I found it changing over time. And so I'm curious if you could talk about what you do to try to control, or perhaps you don't try to control, I don't know, the audience's opinions of the different characters, and how that sort of work can vary from genre to genre.
Yeah, and actors love that stuff. Everything you just talked about, like that's their favorite thing because there's nothing, I think, duller for an actor than to strike one note on the first day of shooting and then have to strike that same note every subsequent day. So
Okay.
they relish like that's. I mean, this was a very small movie, and I was able to get really good actors for it. And part of the reason was that they saw potential in the script to do interesting stuff. And so um, the actor you're talking about, his name's Todd Van Voris, and he spends the whole movie strapped to a chair. So part of my pitch to him was, here's an opportunity you've never had. You were going to take away all of your physicality, essentially, which is half of what an actor has to offer. What they're doing with their body and what they're doing with their voice, essentially. And so we're going to limit him to just the voice. And not only that, but he's going to have to give a performance that does exactly what you just mentioned, which is make the audience question his motivations, his backstory, and his sympathies. I said, I want people to be rooting for you at the beginning of this movie, but by the end, I want them to not really be sure if they should be rooting for you. And that was a cool thing for him to do. And because we shot out of sequence, it's something that I had to work very carefully with him to chart, because the first scene we shot was the long last scene of the movie where kind of the big reckoning comes about, and they have this sort of 15-minute conversation, and we did that first. So that was something I learned from Kathleen when I was writing that book, that she talked about shooting out of sequence in movies and what an incredible challenge that is versus the work she does on stage, where you go on and then you do act 1, act 2, and act 3, and the performance you craft has an obvious arc because it's happening in the order that the screenwriter wrote it. Sorry, playwright. Whereas in film, you could be shooting the middle of the movie first, and then a little bit of the beginning, and then you shoot the end, and then you go back to the beginning, then you finish the middle. And to have to craft a performance that has an arc over the course of 90 minutes to 2 hours and feels consistent and coherent while doing it that way is really, really tricky. Plus they're working an actor actually only works a few minutes a day. Most of their day they're in their trailer, right? So again, it's sort of that the capacity to move into the right spot in the performance so that it'll make sense when the film is cut together is a challenge for actors I hadn't really thought about before working with her. And so I think it's my responsibility as a director to help an actor navigate that.
Yeah, I'm curious why you shot it out of order, because I was under the impression that the typical motivation for why a film would be shot out of order is because it's like, okay, we have two scenes that, take place, are 40 minutes apart in the movie, but they take place in the same location. So let's shoot them both while we're in this location. Or we have these two scenes with the same characters, even though they're in different parts of the movie. Let's shoot them since we have all these same actors here. But this is all in the same location with the same actors. So why not just shoot it all the way through like a play?
Yeah, it's entirely for all the non-romantic answers you might suspect, which have to do with scheduling actors and camera setups and how long it takes to change a camera setup and a lighting setup, and the block of time that we had available to us on a given day. Like one of those days we might have had, in fact, that day, I think we had a full 10 hours to work. And that's why I was like, well, we're going to do this massive scene then, because it's going to take 10 hours and I don't want to split it over multiple days because I want to put them in the headspace and keep them there. So it's stuff like that. It's like scheduling.
Okay.
Scheduling nightmares.
The sort of details that you don't think of until you're in the weeds of doing it.
Yeah. The not fun stuff that if you have a big budget, then you can hire an assistant director whose job it is to schedule your movie. And but when you're working on the micro budget, you're in that stuff yourself. You're a big part of that. So
Oh, you did have a production assistant on this, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wasn't. I had a crew. I mean, it's not like I made the movie alone. I've done that before, and that's I don't need to do that again. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I certainly had help, and but on a micro budget set, you wear a lot of hats over the course of the day. I mean, the nice thing about a budget, I will say, is that it affords you the luxury of only having to put on one hat at a time. It's nice to just be the director for the day and not have to not have a problem arise and have to put your producer hat on for 30 minutes and then go back to being a director. That's the kind of thing that happens when you're working on really low budget movies.
Yeah, you are not the first person to tell me that.
Yeah.
Okay. I already asked you about this a little, but I'd like to go back to it. Where do you think the future of independent micro-budget filmmaking is going? I'm thinking of innovations like, I think it was from 2015, the movie Tangerine. Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which was shot entirely on an iPhone,
Mm-hmm.
and at this point, a several generations old iPhone. And so things like to what degree do you expect to see more feature films shot on phones? What other
Mm-hmm.
innovations and trends that you see do you expect to continue? And do you see anything that you think will really shake things up?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I notice as a professor is more students using their phones to make movies and being unable to tell that that's what they're doing, which is
You're unable to tell that they're using their phones?
I used to be able to look at student film and have a pretty good idea of what they shot it on. And that's gotten tougher because of how good the sensors and the lenses are on cell phones. You can still kind of tell because cell phones always have these insanely wide angle lenses which flatten the image. So whenever I see a movie and everything looks really flat, like everything is in focus from the actor to the horizon, I'm like, oh, okay, this is probably shot on a phone, but that's okay. As long
Although
as
if I may interject,
yeah,
that is actually at least on some of the most recent phones, less a function of the lens that they're using and more a function of the software that's processing the image. That it is possible to, if you don't use the default video app but download something like Filmic Pro,
mm-hmm.
you can adjust the focus much more precisely, and it what it I believe what the default app is doing is recording two videos at the same time, and or more videos, and compressing them into a single thing so that everything's in focus.
Mm-hmm.
So even that is going to go away as a thing that lets you detect when something's shot on a phone.
Yeah. And I don't know how good our eyes will be for this kind of thing. Maybe a professional cinematographer would be able to tell, but the process that you're talking about is a digital process. It's essentially like compositing two images, right?
Yes.
And this is what phone software has had to do forever, because most of the lenses on phones are essentially fisheye lenses. They're so wide. They're designed that way because the average person who's shooting a bar mitzvah or a family barbecue does not want to have to worry about keeping the kids in focus as they're playing in the yard and they're filming. They want everything to be in focus. And so it makes sense that they would have these crazy wide angle lenses on, but it requires the software to sort of anamorphic images. It has to change the image before you can look at it. Otherwise everybody looks like a cartoon. What's interesting about Tangerine and some of the stuff that like Soderbergh has done is that they're using these pretty sophisticated lenses that they're strapping to to phones,
Yeah.
right? So it's a little misleading to look at a movie as beautiful as Tangerine and go, wow, it's shot on a phone, and have this idea that the Sean Baker just pulled his iPhone out of his pocket on the day they went to the set, when in reality, like, there was a lot of gear attached to that
Yeah,
to that phone.
the way I think of it is, they had a certain amount of budget for
Mhm.
all of the camera gear, and by using an existing camera, they were able to spend all of that budget on lenses and mounts.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool. I'm so curious to try it myself. I haven't made a movie on a phone, but I am eager to do it, and I hope to do it in the next year or so, just to have the experience of kind of experimenting with it, because I think it'd be really fun. Um, but yeah, I mean, to get to your question though, I think the more interesting thing is not the technology, and more the idea that people that didn't used to be able to make movies, like for example, high school kids can now make like feature films, and you can find them and watch them, and some of them are really impressive.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I remember making films in my backyard as a kid and needing to uh like feed the camera was plugged in with a wire to my VCR that needed to be like fed through a window so that we could shoot in the backyard, and that's not an issue anymore.
Yeah, tell me about it. The first movies I made were, to edit them, I had to chain a couple VCRs together, and do the pause method, which anyone my age will remember this, and it makes a glitch on every single cut. So all, all of my earliest films, shot on VHS, have a glitch on every single edit, and now, like, what the students I have coming into my class, that are like 19, 20 years old, they've been shooting and editing video since they were, and posting it, like distributing it even, since they were like little kids, which is something I've been teaching for like 20 years now, and that's a change that I see pushed a little further every single year. It doesn't mean any of them have any idea how to tell a story with those images, but it does mean that they're coming in with a technical savvy, and just the experience of having done it, that I haven't seen before, which is kind of cool, because it creates a shortcut to do more interesting stuff in the classroom.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up about the distinction between storytelling skills and technical skills. And it seems relatively straightforward to gain technical skills. You keep trying to make things, and whenever you encounter a technical problem that you don't know how to do, you look up a guide for how to do it. For aspiring, teenagers or people who can't afford to go to film school or things like that, what sort of strategies would you recommend for learning more about how to tell stories effectively through the medium of film?
Mhm. Well, I mean, the best thing you could do is watch as much work as you can. Um, I mean, the Tarantino is the famous example that everybody likes to point at, right? That he didn't go to film school. He worked at a video store, and he watched a million videos, and he rewound them and paused them and rewound them and watched them again and analyzed shots and storytelling structures, and he stole stuff from all of those videos to put in his own movies. So you don't need film school. I think but film school does offer you, a forum in which to experiment with like-minded peers, and opportunity to work with faculty who have experience guiding, you know, developing visions, for filmmakers. It's a good place to find a voice. Do you have to go to film school to do that? No, not at all. But it can certainly help. Um, I'll tell you that when I used to work in Hollywood before I became an academic, and I was an editor, and I remember this guy one day coming to my edit bay to drop off a bunch of dailies. This is back when they were shooting on tape. You had to digitize the tape before you could edit it. So
You
he
had
was
to
bringing
physically transport the tape
it.
to the
Yeah.
editing bay.
Yep. So he was bringing the footage, and he saw the two big monitors that I was cutting on, and I was working on an Avid at that time, and the Avid had this very colorful rainbow keyboard. It was a color-coded keyboard, and he looked at that and he goes, "Whoa!" He goes, "I have to learn how to use that so I can start editing." And I was like, "What do you mean, professionally?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay." And he left, and I just remember thinking, knowing how to use this machine, this keyboard, no more makes you an editor than if you taught me how to like hold an easel and some paints would make me into Bob Ross. Like it's just the two things have nothing to do with each other. And so that's something I always have to sort of dispel for film students. Like it's usually kind of a first day thing. They come in and they think that the purpose of film school is to learn how to use a red or how to shoot with a C300. And I could teach, I could teach anyone how to do that. I could teach a little kid how to operate a red, but you know, that doesn't make you a filmmaker. It doesn't show you how to tell a story that's going to be interesting to an audience. So, that's the thing. That's the big kind of misconception about tools that I find. I find talk of technology to be very limiting in its interest to me, really.
Yeah. Um, Although talking about the sort of almost contrast here between technology and storytelling is making me think of um, how we can use that the specifics of a given piece of technology to the advantage of a storytelling. I'm thinking of a horror comedy that I watched recently, Dude Bro Party Massacre 3. Have you heard of this?
No, it's a great title.
It's a great title. There is no Dude Bro Party Massacre 1 or 2.
Nice.
The sort of meta premise of the film is that you are watching somebody's pirated home video version of this film where it was playing on TV and they recorded it on their VCR. And so you are watching a VHS tape. Although I haven't been able to confirm this, but I believe that the entire film was created digitally and that there was never actually video involved at any point of the process, but they deliberately mimic like the artifacting and sort of stuff that comes with video. And I've been noticing that more and more, and like that's a thing that people of approximately my age who have this nostalgia for like Blockbuster Video and things like that, of like, oh, let's go, watch a bunch of VHS tapes, people have been getting into that, like with movies like VHS and VHS, which I really like that one. That's a great movie. And the thing that I find most interesting and most amusing about this new movement that seems to be arising is that of all the ones that I've seen, I think VHS is the only one that was actually shot using video, and the rest are entirely shot using modern tools and then altered to look as though they were shot using video. But at least to my eye, it's usually pretty apparent which one somebody is doing. And so I'm curious, what have you seen that really makes use of the specific technology that it's used to like Dude Bro Party Massacre 3 is specifically attempting to evoke the feeling of watching a movie late night on your crappy CRT television. It even has poorly edited out, in significant air quotes, commercials every now and then. And so that's very much making use of the specific technology in order to evoke a specific feeling as you're watching the film. I'm curious if you've seen other interesting people attempting to do that sort of thing, or if you have had any ideas yourself in that regard.
Yeah, it's that kind of experimentation is really interesting, and I think what what you're getting at the end there. I think I agree with you. It's interesting when there's a certain feeling attached to an aesthetic, and it usually emerges from different eras of technology. So we attack, something looks a certain way in the 70s, and then something else that looks different in the 80s, and it's almost like a cultural construct, right? Like the idea of, even a long time ago, the difference between film and television, shooting on celluloid versus shooting on video. One is an electronic approximation of an image, whereas the other one is a purely photographic process, and your eye receives them differently, right? When you look at a video image, you're looking at two fields of lines of pixels that are being drawn on the screen 24 to 30 times a second. When you're looking at a film image, you're being given an actual photograph, a complete photograph, all at once, 24 to 30 times a second. They're going to look different to the eye, and because we historically have consumed one in one setting, which is a movie theater, and the other one in the other setting, which is our living rooms, we've culturally and emotionally assigned different sort of value to them. And so one has become to mean truth, right? Video now means documentary to most people. It means the news. It means something real. It means reality. Whereas film means fiction. It's something more romantic. It's more heightened. But we don't stop to think about why those things feel different to us. And it's why, and I did this with Blackpool even, it's why we try to take digital information and make it look photographic and analog. Blackpool had a film plate applied to it in post-production. We recorded a very clean digital image, and then we put fake grain on it. And I had a bunch of projectionists that thought it was 16 millimeter, and I was like, cool, that means we pulled it off. But it was just, it's because it's a narrative work, and we wanted it to look like, we wanted it to enter being the audience, their headspace as a fictional narrative work. We didn't want you thinking about the quality of the image and how it might. It's that weird thing. Peter Jackson did The Hobbit a few years ago.
Oh yeah,
right?
in very high frame rate.
Yeah, 60 frames a second. And I don't know if you actually saw any of that footage, but it's so bizarre looking, because it's like watching The Hobbit done as local television news. It has this, you can see, not only can you, first of all, it's way too much resolution. You can see all of the lines of the makeup where it meets the flesh, and you can see the wigs, and it looks awful in that sense, but it also moves weird,
very fluidly in a
but in a way that looks completely artificial.
It made me think of a video game.
Yeah, exactly. And your eye takes it and assigns a different, an emotional response to it, because we're just culturally not used to seeing that kind of story done with that kind of aesthetic. And it's very off-putting and very weird, and yet in theory looks better than most film, right? Because you're getting more frames a second. It's more visual information, so it should look better to you, and yet somehow it looks worse than 24 frames a second where you're getting less information.
Yeah, I mean, the comparison that always comes to mind in that regard is what is the most visual information you could possibly experience as an individual? Go outside and stare at the sun. But that's not a really great experience.
Well, I've read, I don't know a ton about it, because I just don't, as I said, I just don't find this stuff to be all that fascinating. But I've heard that 8K provides more visual information than the eye can really effectively process. So there's a point at which, you're spending all this money on a television, and they're making these amazing advancements in resolution on your TV. There's a point where you are not going to be able to appreciate it because it's going to move beyond what you can really
Yeah.
take as a person, you
Yeah.
know.
Um, Backing up a moment about thinking about film specifically, I I'm a big fan of old black and white and silent films,
Mhm.
and a lot of those, the visual quality of them has degraded over time because the only version that we have access to was digitized from a piece of literal film stock that literally degraded over time.
Mhm.
And but some of them have been kept in pristine condition. And so whenever I like show my friends an old film that has been kept in pristine condition, there is always somebody who's like really surprised and who thinks it must have been, digitally upscaled or something like that, because they're just shocked at the potential resolution of film stock. Um, which it always makes me wonder, like I watch these old movies, how different was the experience for the people who first watched them, how different was the experience for the people who made them. Um and a modern thing that I've been frustrated with, that strikes me as sort of similar, is quite a lot of modern films, especially horror films, are extremely dark. And a hypothesis I ran into recently is that the people who are doing the editing and the color grading and all of that sort of stuff of these films are using extremely high-end monitors that can display tiny deep differences in contrast and really deep, rich blacks and stuff like that. And so from their perspective, it is not nebulous and overly dark. From their perspective, it's crystal clear. But then when I watch it on my cheap home setup,
Mhm.
I can't tell what's going on. Um, And so I'm curious, when you're you edited this movie, right? In
Mhm.
addition to writing and directing it,
Mhm.
when you're editing it, do you edit it on like a really high end monitor? Or do you watch it on multiple different monitors in order to see what it would be like? How does that
Yeah,
go?
yeah, both. I edit on a really nice monitor, um, but I take it and I look at it on my TV, um, with the factory settings, because I know that ultimately most people, that the biggest audience the movie is going to find is going to be on streaming. That's just the reality of it. And so, um, I know most people are going to see it in their living rooms, and I hope that can look as good as it possibly can. But yeah, you're right. That's a funny thing. I hadn't really thought about the fact that these people are looking at these things on $12,000 monitors. And then, do you remember the whole hullabaloo around I think it was the next to last episode of Game of Thrones? It was a big battle. The whole episode was a battle sequence, and basically every major news outlet in the world the day after it premiered said that people were
Nobody could see
horrifically
anything. Yeah,
horrifically upset because nobody could tell what the hell was going on. I
yeah,
mean, I even remember seeing it and like cranking the contrast a little bit on my monitor, on my TV, trying to figure out like what the hell I was looking at. And
yeah.
I wonder if it's at least in part because of what you just said, which is they were making it in, probably a facility that could accommodate the nuance of all those shadows. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and even just like being in a completely, like, this is not a blackout curtain behind me, and so there's some light coming through it. And so unless I'm watching movies in the dead of night, I mean, which to be fair, I often am watching movies in the dead of night. uh yeah, everything that takes you further away from ideal conditions is something that I would really hope that the people doing the editing would keep in mind, but it appears that often they don't. The one that's
Yeah.
really getting my goat at the moment is the Hellraiser sequel slash reboot, where um, everything about it looks really great to me, except that it's incredibly dark. And like I did a comparison recently, just to my friends, showing here's the reveal of the Hell Priest slash Pinhead character in the new one, and here's the same scene from the original, and look how easy it is to tell what's going on in the original
Yeah.
compared to the remake.
I remember the first time I saw Blackpool in a really state of the art theater was at a film festival, and there was all this stuff in the background of the shots that I was like, hey, I haven't seen that since I cut this like 8 months ago. I had like completely forgotten that that stuff was even there, and I was, oh, look at that! Like, this is what it looks like with, you know, 6-figure projection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, an experience I had recently. I live in a relatively small town that still has a drive-in movie theater, and so they will occasionally show older films.
Mhm.
And we there was recently a triple feature of Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And Friday and Nightmare both looked exactly how I remembered them. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre looked really dramatically different than I remembered it looking. And I found, again, going to what you were saying about The Hobbit, where the image is, in a technical sense, better, but it does a worse job of the storytelling. That one of the things I've always loved about Texas Chainsaw is that it's this very grimy, gritty, low budget film that practically looks like a snuff film that was filmed by the characters, even though, you know, clearly it's not framed that way.
Mhm.
But then the uh, version that I saw at the drive-in was crystal clear, and I could see every little detail. And this let me notice things where I was like, oh, that piece of furniture is much newer than that piece of furniture,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And it really took me out of the film.
Yeah.
And I asked the projectionist about this after the fact, and I was like, what's going on? Why is this so different from what I'm used to? And the response was, which I've got written down here, is, we're guessing you've just seen Terrible Prince before, but we ran on digital, and maybe you've only ever seen it on 35 millimeters. Which, I mean, it was shot on 16 millimeters,
Yeah.
so already the fact that they're calling it 35 millimeter makes me a little incredulous about their explanation of it. But I'm really curious if you have a hypothesis as to what's going on in that regard. Like, was it originally intended to look this way, and it's just the fact that honestly, probably mostly seen it on video, which is going to degrade the quality even further, or what's going
Yeah,
on?
I mean, it's probably a couple things. It's how you first consumed it the first 45 times you saw it. And so that's the way it should look in your head, right? Um and also it's possible that they, in digitally restoring it, if you want to use that word, have cleaned it beyond where they should have for a movie like that. Where I see that and where I find it really distracting is with old special visual effects.
Hmm.
One of my favorite movies from the 80s is The Last Starfighter, and they showed it on an IMAX screen here in Portland a couple of years ago. I was so excited to go see it on a big screen, and I went, and all the effects you could see the matte lines around every spaceship. So anytime a spaceship flew through the frame, there was this traveling block of gray around the edges of it.
Oh man.
It looked like South Park animation, like cut out, like
Oh
they were just moving
yeah, I know what you mean.
paper around the screen, and it looks so awful. And I realized, like, oh, so it's possible you can clean a movie up too much. Like this kind of thing, I would never have seen it in a lower resolution, which is how I've always watched this movie, in a lower resolution. And I was sort of like, I don't know
Yeah.
that I ever even want to see this on Blu-ray. Like maybe DVD is like the limit for The Last Starfighter, because there's a point where it's actually going to start to look worse the more
Yeah.
the cleaner it looks.
Yeah. The thing that made me really suspect that there was some digital cleanup going on like that is that not only did this print of Texas Chainsaw look much cleaner than I remembered it looking, it looked much cleaner than the two movies we had just watched before, Friday and Nightmare. And so that made me think that, like, unless they for some reason only had access to a lower quality print of those two films, which seems unlikely. Um, this seems like it must have been a deliberate decision that someone made.
Yeah.
Uh,
The studios seem to have an unnatural fear of film grain. When you like the idea of digitally restoring a movie, it seems like to a lot of studios means trying to scrub out all the grain so that like the idea that grain is not cannot be part of a picture with clarity, which I find is really weird for a medium of film. Like
that's especially
Predator. Look at the Predator, the original Predator Blu-ray, and it's one of the ugliest things I've ever seen because they digitally scrubbed the image to try to get all the film grain out of it. And it's a 30-plus-year-old movie. It's going to have big film grain in it, and it should. And there's nothing wrong with that because that just means it looks like a movie. And in fact, for a movie like that, you almost want it because, it's sort of like you were saying, you want to feel like you're at the drive-in, right? You want to feel like you're watching
yeah.
a movie. And so, yeah, they scrub it and it creates these like horrific digital artifacts. And you feel like you're just watching something that's streaming but you're watching it on a very slow connection. So it's the sort of the experience of looking at it, and I look at it and I think, how could anybody who works in the film industry have thought this looks good or better than it did?
That's a fascinating dichotomy there because, like you say, there's this sort of fear of the natural artifacts that arise, while at the same time, there's also a strong tendency for people to artificially put those in to make things look like they were filmed on film, like they were shot on film.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you think about it. Yeah, that some people are working to get rid of that, and at the other end of the budgetary spectrum, we're putting it in. Yeah, it's very bizarre. There's a theater here in Portland called the Hollywood Theater, who do really innovative programming. They're kind of like the Alamo Draft House for Portland. They do really interesting stuff. And one of the series that they run shows, it's called B Movie Bingo, where you get a bingo card and they show a B movie. But what's great about it is they show it on VHS. And so they actually wheel this cart with the VHS deck out on the stage in front of the screen, and it's a giant screen. It's it's like an old historic film palace, and so they hook this VCR up to their projection, and they actually project the movie from the VHS tape. And often it's just awful looking. It's rolling. The image is rolling. There's the glitch at the top that kind of that wavy, awful quality that old VHS tapes get, and sometimes the sound just drops out or it just goes into a bunch of static for a couple minutes, and and they just roll with it. They just and it's not, and they're showing movies that are like available on 4K, but they purposely show them from the VHS tape. And I always think that that's just a great way to see those movies and experience them with a group.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's fun. Do you still have a VCR?
I do not. No, I moved too many times before. Like now I own this house and can afford to like accumulate things like that. But the time between when I last owned a VCR and now, I moved way too many times in between to cart that sort of thing around with me.
Did you grow up on VHS? How old are you?
Yes, I'm 34.
You're a VHS kid. So that's the tail end. You kind of remember the tail end of VHS, right? As a 34-year-old.
Yeah.
VHS was kind of gone by the late 90s, right?
Was it?
I think so.
No, I distinctly remember getting a copy of The Matrix on VHS, and The Matrix was released in theaters in 1999.
Yeah.
And so
like early 2000s, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
DVD, yeah.
Yeah, so I started watching movies really in the early 90s, and then throughout the 90s was when I until recently was the time I most spent watching films.
Yeah. I asked my students about it, and they have most of them have never held a VHS tape or seen one in person. Oh, wow. Yeah. It's
I
wild.
remember being a kid and like seeing people hold up film strips in, in movies
Hmm.
and being like, okay, I want to do that. And like disassembling a VHS tape and going, why isn't it working?
Hmm.
Because I didn't know the difference between film
Yeah,
and video
holding
at
the
the
tape
time.
up. Yeah, yeah. I can't see through this.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's cool. We have a at the university where I work, there's a entirely student-run movie theater where they do all the programming and booking and everything themselves, and they always get 35 millimeter prints of everything or almost everything they show. And it's fun to go because they're not getting the best quality prints. And in some ways, like that's far more rewarding. Like I went to see Footloose there, and which is another one of my favorite movies from the 80s. And I thought, I hope this print is just looks like garbage. I hope this looks like a truck backed over the print, because if I want to see this movie look amazing, I can watch it any night of the week on my big screen TV with my Blu-ray player. Like I want to feel like I'm seeing this at like a drive-in. And sure enough, it was like just the worst print. It was like there was dust everywhere, and there were like the little scratches in the hairs in the gate.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is so great. I love it.
I, During that viewing of Texas Chainsaw, I found myself feeling appreciative of all the schmutz on my car windshield.
Yeah.
That it,
Yeah. Well, it's as close as you're going to get to feeling like you're seeing it when it came out, right? Like
yeah,
having an experience of, I mean, short of like borrowing your dad's old car from the 70s or whatever and going in that, it's it's hard to get those experiences now.
yeah. I really enjoy like I'd never been to a drive-in before I moved here, and now it's my favorite way of watching movies.
Hmm.
I really enjoy the social aspect of it. Like before the movies began, I was talking to the people in the car next to me,
Hmm.
and they were like, "Yeah, you know, I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the drive-in when it came out," and I'm like, "Oh man, history!
Yeah,
I
it's
love it
amazing.
so much."
Yeah. Did you sneak anybody in your trunk? That's the true.
No,
That's how you have the true drive-in experience. Is you
oh yeah,
bring 4 or 5 of your friends and they crouch in the trunk so that you don't have to pay for
yeah. Oh
them.
man. I'm willing to pay to support this place because it's $11 for a ticket and it's a double or triple feature, and they have like it's $6 for an actually good hamburger at the restaurant that is
Nice.
also the building hosting the projection booths. So um the best deal in cinema, in my opinion.
That's cool. Yeah, we have one here too, about 20 minutes south of Portland. And they just this weekend, the booth got hit by a U-Haul, like a
Oh
hit
my
and run.
gosh.
Somebody brought a U-Haul and crashed into the booth and knocked it out and then took off. So
Oh geez.
they're running a crowdfunding campaign to do the repairs, because I imagine that they weren't exactly turning a giant profit
Yeah.
anyway. So hopefully they'll be able to get it fixed and back up and running, because it's a valuable resource to us film lovers.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I wish them luck with that. Um, so do you have would you like to plug your upcoming project? Do you have a social media or anything like that that people should follow you on?
Yeah, I mean, just my website, which is my name. It's www.dustinmorrow.com, and that has kind of an archive of all of my scholarly writing as well as my film work, and
And it has many but not all of your short films on it.
it does. It has quite a few of them. There are a few that are still kind of circulating in festivals, and so they'll go up there eventually. But for the moment, they're out
Yeah.
screening around. Um, yeah, yeah, that's where you can find me. I invite anybody that listens to this who wants to talk to feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to chat with fellow cineasts.
I haven't actually heard that word before. I've heard like cinephile and
Mhm.
and things like that, but not cineast.
Yeah, it's a Cineaste.
Ah.
It's probably French. Um, it's a little pretentious, but so what? We're filmmakers, we're film lovers. We can afford to be a little pretentious from time to time.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, as have I, Thomas. Thank you so much for reaching out. It was a lot of fun chatting with you.